Good morning, everybody. We apologize for the short delay, running with some technical difficulties. I am Lisette Acosta Corniel. I am an assistant professor at the Center for Ethnic Studies at the Borough of Mahan Community College, CUNY. And I am very excited to be moderating this panel because despite not having such a connection with my research, it's very connected to my roots. And I identified 100% with a lot of what's being discussed in this panel today. The panel that you are attending is the Politics of Identity, Part 1. And our three presenters, we're going to start with Fiordalisa Hipólito, who is a PhD candidate for the Languages, Literatures, and Cultures Department at the State University of New York at Albany. And that is my alma mater, actually. I am very excited to see someone from where I come from academically in the academic world. She's an adjunct professor at Ostos Community College and a lecturer at SUNY Albany as well, and an active, very active member of her community doing volunteer work. Her presentation today, Marginación, mucho que decir sobre el habla dominicana and how we are perceived. Fiordalisa, when you are ready. And by the way, quick parentheses, what we're going to do is that we're going to sorry to be a police for this, but I'm going to time my phone presenters to 15 minutes, even though you have 20 minutes. So at 15 minutes, you're going to hear the bell ring. That's just a warning that you have 5 minutes left. Okay? Gracias. Cuando estés lista, Fiordalisa.
Muy buenos días a todos. Voy a comenzar mi presentación. Y se llama, la titulé Marginación, la representación y la autorrepresentación en lenguaje dominicano. Voy a leer un poco el abstracto de qué se trata. Esto es un artículo que estoy trabajando. Por muchos años he visto cómo el lenguaje dominicano ha sido excluido y despreciado, tanto en el ámbito social, público y cultural. Los dominicanos tenemos nuestro propio dialecto y nuestra propia manera de hablar. Las personas tienden a crear una hegemonía lingüística, es decir, existen percepciones de superioridad en distinguir un lenguaje como el auténtico, como por ejemplo el lenguaje de España. Tiene tendencia en ser el lenguaje bueno, el lenguaje perfecto y el modelo a seguir. La sociolingüística trata de estas variaciones lingüísticas y léxico. Estos temas son de suma importancia para entender las raíces provenientes del habla de los dominicanos. El hecho de que los dominicanos tengamos vocablos diferentes no quiere decir que seamos unos habla malo. En más de una ocasión he escuchado esta frase: el dominicano es una habla malo. En este estudio pretendo comprobar que el lenguaje dominicano no está por debajo de ningún otro lenguaje y que el simple hecho que exista variaciones lingüísticas como existe en todos los idiomas no es justo que quieran marginar el lenguaje dominicano. Es necesario comenzar a autorrepresentar y representar el lenguaje dominicano. Hablar del lenguaje dominicano es representar el lenguaje como una identidad nacional, enfrentándolo a los criterios impuestos por la sociedad. Por otro lado, la autorrepresentación del lenguaje dominicano, el cual está relacionado con la divulgación de cómo queremos ser vistos y etiquetados dentro de la sociedad. Es necesario hacer un pacto entre la representación y la autorrepresentación dentro del lenguaje dominicano, para así ayudar a rescatar y valorar nuestro dialecto. Primeramente, quiero comenzar con unos cuantos conceptos que sería muy importante identificarlo. Cuando hablamos de una lengua, es un término general. Está la lengua española, el inglés, todo tipo de lenguas, idioma, el dialecto y también la jerga, que es un término que más adelante lo vamos a ver. Una lengua, como dije, es un término general que se refiere a un sistema de comunicación. Un lenguaje es la capacidad de comunicarnos dentro de la sociedad. Y el idioma está derivado a la lengua hablante. Un dialecto es la variedad y las manifestaciones de la lengua a nivel social y cultural. Y según la Real Academia Española, la jerga es un lenguaje especial y no formal que usan entre sí los individuos de ciertas profesiones y oficios. Es un lenguaje también especial utilizado originalmente con propósitos crípticos con términos, con determinados grupos que a veces se extiende al uso general. Y tenemos la jerigonza, que es un lenguaje difícil de entender. Y quiero abrir esta cita de este lingüística, profesor Milton Acevedo, que dice así: escribe que en lingüística el dialecto es estrictamente un término técnico sin ninguna connotación valorativa, que significa lo mismo que variedad, variante o modalidad de un idioma. En cambio, la lengua o idioma es un término más general. Hablamos de dialecto para diferenciarnos entre dos o más modalidades de una lengua. Ahora voy a pasar a una crítica que hicieron. Esta crítica fue sacado desde las redes sociales y dice así. Alguien se expresa diciendo: qué pésimo castellano tienen esos. No se le entiende nada, por ende no la veré. Otra persona le contesta, dice: de acuerdo, no sé cuál es el mensaje de que hablar así como todo raro. El dominicano promedio no habla así. Otra persona dice: sí, es una distorsión completa de nuestra lengua. Y otra persona le contesta diciendo: por eso es que el cine dominicano se queda solo en su país. Y la otra persona concluye diciendo: yo amo todos los acentos de cada país. Aquí vemos cómo es la crítica y no solamente a nivel, digo, en el internet o lo que sea. Yo lo he escuchado, hasta a mí misma me lo han dicho, que cuando dicen, tú no pareces dominicana, y yo le digo, ¿por qué? O porque hablas diferente. Entonces yo digo, entonces, ¿cómo hablamos los dominicanos? Entonces son esas cosas que realmente es difícil de no sé cómo a veces no ponen en esa situación. Pero ¿qué pasa cuando se margina el dialecto dominicano? Muchas personas se autolimitan a presentar su verdadero rostro por miedo al no ser juzgado. Se ponen la máscara para formar un doble yo, adquiriendo una identidad falsa. La sociedad lo autorrepresenta y representa como con prejuicios, aislando nuestro dialecto a no valorarlo y a despreciarlo. Y mi pregunta surge: ¿por qué se critica tanto el dialecto dominicano? ¿Por su manera de hablar o por sus variaciones lingüísticas? Aquí he hecho una tabla de cómo se ven, cómo se dice la palabra dinero y pajilla o sorbete, porque también es muy conocida en diferentes países. Si yo le digo que en la República Dominicana para hablar de dinero dicen cuarto, muchas personas a veces de otros países dicen, pero ¿cómo así? O sea, por eso tiendo más a usar el dinero, porque la palabra cuarto, dinero, que significa dinero en la República Dominicana, es utilizado mucho por los dominicanos, aunque también decimos dinero. Pero miren cómo le dicen en Puerto Rico, chavo, en España, guita, en Cuba, barro, en México, lana, en Perú, chivilines, en Argentina, plata, en Bolivia, pesos, ¿verdad? Entonces vemos la palabra sorbete o pajilla, como le dicen, palimete, ¿verdad? Calimete, que decimos los dominicanos, en Puerto Rico, sorbeto, en España, pajita, sorbito, en Cuba, sorbente, en México, popote, en Perú, cañita, en Argentina, sorbete, en Bolivia, bombilla. Mirando estas variaciones, si yo escucho una persona de Perú que le dice el dinero chivilines, ¿le voy a decir que no sabe hablar español? No, es una variación de su país, es una identidad, así es que le llaman. Entonces, esas son las cosas que realmente la persona tiene que mirar, ¿verdad? Entonces tenemos estos rasgos porque quiero concentrarme en la área dominicana, cómo hablan los dominicanos. La República Dominicana consta de una variedad lingüística bastante peculiar. Hablando en términos generales, según el lingüística profesor Moreno Fernández, el español del Caribe presenta características compartidas con América hispánica, con el ceseo, es decir, la manera de pronunciación de las palabras, y el yismo al distinguir la pronunciación de las palabras. Una de las características son el debilitamiento de las consonantes que aparecen al final de las sílabas y también el debilitamiento de las de entre vocales. En la República Dominicana existe la aspiración de las S o pérdidas consonantes y eso también a veces lo vemos. Y vamos a ver, aquí tenemos las tres áreas, tenemos el Cibao, el sur y el este. Aquí como podemos ver, lo que pasa en el Cibao, y voy a poner en el Cibao, el Santiago de los Caballeros, que muchas personas, no todos, a veces dicen, en vez de decir comer, dice comer. O en el sur, a veces dicen por, a veces dicen por. O en el este, a veces está esa pérdida cambian la R por la L, como recoger, dicen recoger. Eso depende también del nivel socioeconómico que se encuentra, ¿verdad? Entonces, tengo aquí unas cuantas representaciones de unos cuantos ejemplos. He escuchado que en algunas partes de la capital, personas que utilizan este tipo de fenómeno a la hora de hablar. Por ejemplo, a veces dicen buscar en vez de buscar. Otra expresión usada es cómo tú estás en vez de decir cómo tú estás. El dominicano Orlando Alba ha escrito varios libros relacionados a la variedad y el léxico dominicano. Según Alba dice, y abro una cita, cualquier dominicano al escuchar a un conciudadano que dice, yo estoy desde las 6 de la mañana en esta esquina y aquí, y nada más he hecho 200 pesos, sería capaz de adivinar con un altísimo índice de probabilidad que no se trata de un profesional, sino de un obrero sin instrucción. La repetida eliminación de la S le facilita llevar a cabo la identificación. Y cierro paréntesis. Estos fenómenos lingüísticos ocurren en la capital, dependiendo del área en que la persona reside y el nivel de educación que posee. El libro de la lingüística del dominicano Orlando Alba dice, del mismo modo, si oyera la forma comer y comer en vez de comer, no solamente podría conocer con mayor o menor precisión el nivel de educación de sus paisanos, sino también su proveniencia geográfica. En mi opinión, comparto con lo que dice el lingüista Orlando Alba. En la República Dominicana, el dominicano se puede distinguir por su manera de hablar dependiendo del nivel socioeconómico. Aquí tengo unas cuantas frases de lo que estaba hablando, unas cuantas jergas del dominicano. Esto es la Academia de la Lengua Dominicana, publicó un diccionario con las frases más populares usadas por los quiqueyanos. Este artículo que dicen lanza diccionario de fraseología dominicana. Si no tienes idea de lo que quiere decir un dominicano, es aquí una recopilación de jergas y anglicismos dominicanos más usados por los quisqueyanos. Aquí mostraré unas cuantas palabras utilizadas mayormente por los jóvenes. La palabra arrancado, como muchos dominicanos dicen, es una persona sin dinero que no tiene dinero. Y dicen, no estoy arrancado, no tengo ni un chele. Es una expresión bien dominicana. El bochinche es un chisme. El cocotazo, golpe en la cabeza con el dedo mayor a un niño que uno le da. El chimichurri, una comida realmente empadado de pan con carne especial a parrilla. El titirimundachi, cuando uno dice, oh, todo el mundo, mira, vete, ahí estaba el titirimundachi, muchachos, eso es bien dominicanizado. El yaniqueque, que se trata de una masa de harina frita aplastada y rica de comer, ¿verdad? También, también tengo aquí un catálogo de jerga, el catálogo de la República Dominicana, que dice, tumba eso, olvida eso no va. Dame banda, olvídate de mí, chapeadora, ahora la chapeadora se ha convertido en un término bastante usual porque le llaman así a una persona, una mujer que se aprovecha o que viene amor solo por dinero. Entonces esa palabra ha crecido bastante. Cotorra es cuando un hombre le gusta hablar a una mujer para enamorarle. Dale cotorra, dale cotorra. Te guayaste es cuando te equivocaste y fracasaste. Te la comiste, lo hiciste bien o mal. No estoy en ti, no te estoy prestando atención. Un vegetal, un viejo que se ve bien. Suéltame, déjame en paz. Está todo, ok, está bien. Ok, vemos esas palabras, ¿verdad? Que realmente es mucho utilizado mayormente por los jóvenes, ¿verdad? También podemos ver personas que posiblemente también utilicen estos términos, pero mayormente se va a ver mucho en la población de los jóvenes, ¿verdad? Entonces, tengo la lengua estándar y la diversidad lingüística dominicana. La lengua estándar es un modelo en que se deriva del dialecto. Se ha dicho que la lengua estándar es la lengua correcta y una lengua culta. En mi opinión, cuando se habla de la lengua estándar, podemos asociarla con las capas estructurales sociales dentro de la sociedad, en la que se pueden incluir diferentes estratos sociales, en lo que se encuentra lo prestigioso, lo popular y lo vulgar. Por ejemplo, la lengua estándar es utilizada dentro del discurso político, la educación, los medios de comunicación, entre otros. Y aquí entonces hago esta pregunta. pregunta, ¿cuáles áreas geográficas en la República Dominicana se considera lengua estándar? Tenemos el este, la capital, el sur, como por ejemplo también Barahona, y el Cibao, Santiago de los Caballeros. La realidad es que no existe un área determinada en la República Dominicana que se pueda reconocer como la lengua estándar. No importa a qué área geográfica pertenezca, la persona se expresa de acuerdo a su nivel socioeconómico. Aquí tengo un artículo, un ejemplo, este artículo es de Sayara Cruz Aponte. Ella hizo un estudio en Puerto Rico, en Río Piedra, y estudió unos cuantos estudiantes, ¿verdad? Entonces, dijeron que cuál país habla mejor o más feo el español. Llegando a la conclusión que todos dijeron que la República Dominicana, España fue el número uno, voy a elegir que habla más bonito, que es el español más correcto y es el español mejor. Y la República Dominicana estuvo entre lo más feo, entre el español más feo. Y de acuerdo, las respuestas que dieron fueron porque cuando fueron bien hechos, porque dicen que los españoles pronuncian las letras donde van, se escucha muy bonito, porque ahí en España sale el español y todos porque me gustan, porque me gusta. Y son esas explicaciones que dijeron acerca de España, que realmente España es el modelo a seguir, ¿verdad? Y que el español dominicano no concluyeron de que no. Eso es una de las críticas también. También otro artículo que vi en Glenis Miguelina Severio también dice los mismos. Esto fue una cita también que saqué de ella, que dice, en segundo lugar se encuentra la clasificación de variable léxica, donde la buena pronunciación y darle el significado correcto a las palabras es de suma importancia en el estrato social alto, con un 23%, 23.3 en la variedad, en la edad. Muchos de ellos dijeron las maneras perfectas de hablar, en lo correcto, se entiende las personas, así no le quitan ni le ponen las palabras. Tú te das cuenta del significado de lo que dicen, así es más fácil, los demás se entienden cuando se ponen las consonantes y dónde las llevan. El país considerado otra vez como el español más correcto es España, ¿verdad? Seguido por Colombia, seguido por Venezuela. Las personas interrogadas a referirse a su preferencia por el español de España y dijeron estos comentarios tales como, allá está la Real Academia en la lengua, allí nace el español, es la madre de la lengua, allí se cumple la regla del idioma, hablan con ese idioma donde van y son más cultos, cada palabra se pronuncia correctamente, pronuncia bien la S y la Z, hablan casi perfectamente, lo hablan correcto, no se utilizan jergas y hablan claro y bien, ¿verdad? Entonces, hay unos cuantos mitos en la corrección lingüística que la gente también dice, para hablar una lengua hay que seguir las normas correctamente de los nativos. Eso no es cierto. La palabra que no está en el diccionario no existen. Eso no es cierto, ¿verdad? Son puros mitos. Y hay que hablar el español como Dios manda. Esos son unos cuantos mitos también que existen. Y yo digo, esta es la pregunta que me hago. Y es que, ¿será que acaso existe un dialecto superior a los demás? Claro, por supuestamente que no. El dialecto de cada país, el dialecto de cada país es una identidad, no es una compatibilidad. La lengua española es solo un órgano y los dialectos son los que hacen las variaciones lingüísticas según el país en el que vives. El dialecto se manifiesta dependiendo del estatus socioeconómico del individuo. Los dialectos son riquezas culturales. Todos tenemos el derecho de disfrutar de nuestro dialecto sin ser juzgados, porque al final lo que cuenta es eso. Cada país es libre de expresarse de la manera que pueda expresarse, no de la manera que otros quieran. Si se le impone una lengua general como modelo, significaría cohibirse de hablar un lenguaje ya aprendido y comenzar desde cero para aprender un lenguaje figurado. Cada persona y cada país tiene un folclore, una cultura diferente. Según Orlando Alba, en su libro Cómo hablamos los dominicanos, explica que, y abro cita, la lengua española es patrimonio de todos y dentro de su unidad fundamental alberga una intensa variedad, porque debe tener la amplitud suficiente y la capacidad necesaria para permitir a sus usuarios manifestarse exactamente como son, con su particularidad, personalidad, cultura y con la nacionalidad que le corresponde. La noción del español estándar debe entenderse como un sistema inclusivo, no exclusivo, constituido por un conjunto de posibilidades que admite diferentes realizaciones. Como consecuencia, una de sus principales características es necesariamente su relativa flexibilidad o elasticidad. Y cierro cita, él habla de los dominicanos, es una identidad cultural y poseemos nuestros propios dialectos, nuestro propio a nivel socioeconómico en que vivimos. Pero ¿qué debemos hacer? Debemos de romper la cadena que le han puesto a nuestro dialecto y poner en claro que nuestro dialecto es nuestra identidad y no podemos apartarnos de él. No debemos de usar las dos caras, es decir, una cara para la sociedad y la otra cara en la realidad, en lo que pertenecemos y lo que somos. Debemos quedarnos con el yo autoidentitario, el pacto de que la sociedad vea nuestro dialecto como una identidad cultural, debe surgir como patrimonio del habla de los dominicanos. Muchísimas gracias.
Excelente, y menos de los 20 minutos. Gracias, Fior, por mantener el tiempo. La verdad que con tu tema hay mucha tela que cortar. Ahí no podemos pasar, creo que el resto de la conferencia hablando de las críticas que recibe el dominicano en cuanto a su forma de hablar en general, porque me ha pasado en varias ocasiones. Así es que me identifico totalmente con tu tema. Vamos a pasar ahora de el dominicano en su habla como identidad en diferentes partes del mundo, no solo en República Dominicana, y vamos ahora a Brasil. Así es que el dominicano está en toda parte, para el que lo tenga en duda. Y tenemos una colega que nos va a traer su presentación, Livia Santos de Souza, que es profesora en la Universidad Federal de Estudios, de Integración de Estudios Latinoamericanos en Brasil, y que actualmente en su investigación está tratando el tema de la escritura Latinx en el nivel de Brasil, el tema de la traducción, que es otro tema también muy importante, y la escritura por mujeres literarias también. Bienvenida, Livia, gracias por ese aporte que haces con tu presentación ahora, Dominican Yorks in Translation, Dominican Diasporic Literature in Portuguese.
Muchas gracias. Bien, yo tenía planeado presentar en inglés.
And you can.
Sí,
totally. Go ahead.
No es un problema. Solamente porque bien, como no es una lengua que uso todos los días, me pareció buena oportunidad para hablar inglés después de hace tanto. First, I would like to apologize to the other participants of the panel and also to our debaters, since I could not send my proper biographical information before. Well, both my parents and my brother tested positive to COVID these days, so I've been really busy and worried about it. But I would really like to take part in this panel and talk to you, exchange information about Dominican Republic as a research theme. So thank you very much. Well, my name is Livia Santos de Souza, as I've been introduced, and currently I teach Spanish as a foreign language and literature in this university, the Federal University of Latin American Integration in Brazil. It's a unique institution here. It's the only bilingual university in the whole country, and we receive students from all over Latin America. It is located in this region in the south of the country that borders Argentina and Paraguay. So it's a very different experience of being Brazilian living here. So since we are so close to other Spanish-speaking countries, and it's also a very multilingual region. And this is one of the reasons I got interested in studying translation and transcultural and transnational communities, just like Dominicans and Dominican Americans specifically. Well, I wrote a PhD dissertation about Junot Díaz books and its translations to Spanish. And I have done part of my research at CUNY, in fact, in the Graduate Center a couple of years ago. And now I'm moving from this research to a different approach. And today I'm going to talk about Brazilian Portuguese translation of Dominican American authors. And the idea for this research came with this previous experience I have already mentioned, the analysis of Achille Berra's versions of The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and This Is How You Lose Her. While thinking of her work, I realized that there were already some studies about translating multilingual Latinx writing to Spanish, but nothing similar to Portuguese. So I imagine that it would be a good thing to work with. Well, and the question I believe that comes next is why to analyze translations to Portuguese? Why is this relevant? And to answer that, I would like to begin with some considerations about the importance of translation to Latinx writing in general to finally get to Portuguese. And I hope I can convince you of the importance of being read in my language. I'd like to share with you some slides. Let me see if I can do this. Come on. Oh, I couldn't do this right now, but I'll try this later. At this point of the presentation, the slides are not so important, but when I show you the text, the literary text, then I think I'll need it. Well, about translation, I don't really need to tell you that being Latinx also mean being Latin American. And I believe that I don't need also to explain how important it is that Latinx literature can be read in Spanish, but I'd like to talk a little bit about it to make my point stronger when I get to Portuguese. I believe that Latinx literature is part of a complex transnational system of cultural goods, to use a sociological concept, and language plays an incredibly significant role in this flow. As we could see with the previous presentation, now language is a very important element to understand identities in general. So when it comes to literature and to translation, again, this importance is still on now. So when a Latinx book is translated to Spanish, it allows this book to circulate, to be accessed, not only in the country that is related more directly with, like Dominican Republic in this case, but also to many other countries. If you consider, as I do, that Latinx literature is also part of Latin American transnational literary system, then translation is the tool that makes this literature available to a considerable part of the continent. Translation is what makes these texts available for readers in general, but also what allows it to be taught in universities or schools, for example, and also to receive media attention, what's very important to understand how literature is received nowadays in all over the world, not only in Latin America. Then this defense of translation, one question remains, why Portuguese? To answer this question, I'd like to present some numbers. Well, today, the whole population of Latin America, including Brazil, is something like 586 million people. When we consider only the population of Brazil, we are today 209 million people. So it's not difficult to realize that we are almost a third of Latin American population today. So to be read in Portuguese means to be read by almost, to be able to be consumed as a writer for almost a third of Latin American population. And since Portuguese is an official language only in Brazil, in Latin America, there's this tendency of imagining Latin America as a continent where everybody speaks Spanish, which is not true. So we are here speaking Portuguese. And I believe that Dominican and Dominican American literature has a lot to say to Brazil. We have really close realities in a lot of points. So I guess it's a really interesting element when literature comes to my country translated. So now I'll try to share my slides again so we can check the text. Well, now I guess I could do this. Can you see my slides right now? Thank you. It was a little bit harder than I imagined, but well, you can see that now. So unfortunately, as you can see in this slide, the number of Dominican American authors and books published in Portuguese is very limited, but we have some titles to work with. First Dominican American author to be translated here was Julia Alvarez, In the Time of Butterflies and Before We Were Free, that was translated in the 90s, early 20s. And as you can see, when you see the case of Julia Alvarez, her books were translated like many years after they were originally published. Same thing that happened to, no, not exactly the same thing, but something something similar happened to Junot Diaz. His books was published in English in a year, and like a couple of years after that were translated to Portuguese. When we come to the experience that I'm really focusing here in this presentation, that is Elizabeth Acevedo, and it is completely different. Her first novel that was published in 2018 was translated and published here in Brazil in the same year. I think it got here first, then the Spanish version was available in some parts of Latin America. So this is a different time, I think. I think nowadays we are more open to receive translated literature from all over Latin America and also from the United States. And this translation that is done that was done by Rio Alonso is the one I'm going to talk a little bit more for you today. But before going to Elizabeth Acevedo's some observations I'd like to do, the first book, Junot Diaz's books was also translated very fast, as I told you, not so fast as Elizabeth Acevedo, but in a couple of years. And personally, I found this translation of Drown, that here in Brazil received the title Afogado, even better than the one that was done to Spanish, because the Brazilian translator could remain much more closer to Diaz's style, but also found good alternatives to keep the multilingual aspect of the book. So it's a very good translation. I don't think it can be compared to the translations by Acho Berras to the following books. She did a really good job keeping the multilingual aspects of the text and also all the slang and the different details of Dominican Spanish, but it is a good version, I guess. It keeps lots of these aspects of orality that are important in Diaz's books. So it gets the translations, the Brazilian translations are good versions of the original text. And the same thing can be said about Poet X. So translating Latinx books is an important task, but also a very challenging one. I have commented briefly here the main issues to this kind of translation to Spanish, especially when dealing with multilingual texts, how to keep the translingual flows in Spanish versions, how to reproduce expressions and the orality of these narratives. And I want to think of the same challenges when translating to Portuguese. And to do that, I will show you some strategies employed by Rio Alonso, the translator of Poet X to my language, to Portuguese. So let's check some examples. I'll be brief doing this. We can talk later if you have questions or any comments. So well, no introduction is needed for the Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, or to the author. We all could hear her yesterday. And it's in fact a memorable book for several reasons. I believe that the fact that the book is completely written in verse and there is a young adult public as a target make the task of translation even more difficult. So these are two aspects that I think that have to be considered when analyzing this translation: the fact that the book is written in verse, and also the fact that the book has a very specific target, that is teenagers, and it can be a little bit more tricky, I think. As I have a very limited time here, I will show you just 3 excerpts of the book, but it could be much more detailed. There are many stuff to see in these different parts of the book. But let's see this first excerpt I chose to show you. I scope out this block. I will start reading in English. I've always called home. Watch the old church ladies, chancletas flapping against the pavement, their mouths letting loose a train of island Spanish as they spread, he said, she said. Listen to honking cabs with bachata blaring from their open windows, complete with basketball echoing from the little park. Laugh at the viejos, my father not included. Finishing their dominoes tournaments with hair slaps and yells of capicu. Well, I won't read the Portuguese version, but if you just give a look, you see that the words that are in Spanish in the original text remain in Spanish in the main translation, or at least most of it. But we have bachata, viejos, and capicu, that are words that were kept in Spanish. There's just one, in this excerpt, there's just one word that is originally in Spanish that is translated to Portuguese, that is chancletas. Well, this is a very interesting strategy for me, because the translator, she chose to keep what is possible to keep in Spanish in the original text in Portuguese. Some of these words, like viejos, for example, are very easy to comprehend for a Brazilian person, even for a Brazilian teenager. It's very close to the Portuguese word. So it's something that can be kept with no problems of comprehension. Bachata and capicu are expressions and names that would be nearly impossible to translate. So it is interesting that they are kept in Spanish, and since it's a book that is meant for teenagers, I guess it's also an invitation to research more about Dominican culture in other contexts. And the word chancletas means something that is very, very popular here in Brazil too. It's translated as chinelas, and well, we use chancletas all the time to go everywhere. So, and chancletas, I guess it's not so transparent as viejos. So it's a word that was necessary to translate, but most of the examples are kept in Spanish, which keeps this bilingual tone of the original text. And sometimes even to the translations to Spanish, it is not possible, because when you translate the whole thing to Spanish, then it becomes a monolingual text most of the times. At the same time, Little Park, there is an expression in English, is kept in English in the Portuguese version, with what I believe gives this idea that we are dealing here with more than one language. And I believe that to think of lexic terms, this is what is more important in this excerpt, but it's in this excerpt, but it's not only these. For example, there is a tendency in the original text in English, the voice, the poetic voice, the author voice is always omitting, but sometimes is omitting the subject pronouns. For example, watch the old church ladies, or listen to honking cabs. These forms of verbs are put here without the pronouns. And in Portuguese, the translator made a similar choice, also omitting the subject pronouns in Portuguese, but using these forms of the verb that you can understand which person is speaking. So there is an effort here not only to keep the lexic aspects of the text, but also to try to reproduce syntax aspects and also morphological aspects. There is really an effort here to try to keep up with the original text. Second excerpt I would like to show you is, these are all from the beginning of the book. I could translate all of the book. I could analyze all the translation because it's very interesting, but I just kept with the first chapter or something. The first chapters, because the chapters are very, very short. So let's check it. This chapter is called Mira Muchacha, completely in Spanish, and in Portuguese, it's the same thing. It's completely in Spanish. Although muchacha is not a transparent word, I believe that it's a very common name. So in general, Portuguese speakers would understand more or less. But the author makes a movement that is, at some point, she translates it, as you can see in the original text. Mira muchacha. It's mommy's favorite way to start a sentence. And I know I've already done something wrong when she hits me with look girl, which is this translation to Mira muchacha. In Portuguese, it gets the same movement, and it's really easy to understand. So sometimes it's not necessary, for example, to make a glossary at the end of the book, or even to make any marks on these Spanish words, because the text itself explains some of these multilingual elements. It's a very interesting experience to read it in another language, in a third language in this case, that is not English or Spanish. And some words are really similar, Spanish and Portuguese. And in this case, it is important to mark, as we can see at this other example. This time it's Mira muchacha. Marina from across the street told me you were on the stoop again talking to los vendedoras. Vendedoras in Portuguese, we would say vendedoras. It's the same, absolutely the same word. So to make it clear that it is in Spanish, it's important to mark the article, which is Spanish, and it's different from Portuguese. There are another elements on this excerpt that we could think of. For example, this last verse, when poetic voice says, "Oíste?" she asks. And it's kept in Portuguese. Oíste, ela pergunta. And oíste is not a transparent form to Portuguese, but I guess it is necessary to keep it in Spanish to give this, to be honest, to the original text, So there is a last example I would show you. I won't speak everything I would think about this one, but just to be short, because my time is running out, I'd like to show you this. That is a moment where the main character says and explain how her name is spelled, Xiomara. And to keep this same idea in Portuguese, it is necessary to completely change it, and to show to the Brazilian reader and Brazilian young reader, which is probably the one that is reading this book, how this name is pronounced. And this also implies some changes, some adaptations. Well, to finish my presentation, I'd like just to reaffirm the importance of translation to Latinx literature, and also the importance of this kind of translation that do not deny the foreignness of the text, that give the code switching, the linguistic and literary values it has, and that do not hide multilingualism for a foreigner reader. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that I have to cut you a little bit short, so that we can proceed as timely as possible. Thank you for the presentation. Y qué bueno que nos están leyendo, y ojalá que nos estén leyendo no solo en Brasil, pero en muchas otras partes del mundo. We're now going to proceed with our third presenter, another very exciting topic. And she is Jennifer Domingo Rudolph, who is an associate professor of Hispanic and Latin studies at Connecticut College. She conducts research on Latinx cultural production. And her most recent book, which now I want to read, is Baseball as Mediated Latinidad, Race, Masculinity, Nationalism, and Performances of Identity, which was released this year. She today will be presenting, and on her topic, Ponle Acento, Structural Racism and MLB's fraught relationship with Spanish. Jennifer, the floor is yours. We have exactly 20 minutes left. Maybe we can still 2 minutes, but it's all yours. And again, you'll hear the bell when you are at 15 minutes. Thank you.
Gracias, Lisette. I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Okay, let's see. Oh, here we go. I hope my screen is my screen visible. Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I see what Livia meant. It was a little trickier. And I will try to be a little bit more expedient because I want to have some time for conversation, because I have a bunch of questions for both presenters already have been fabulous. So I will do my best to maybe just, there's a few things I think I can go quickly through, but I'm not going to read the title again, because I think Lisette did a great job of doing that. And so this little icon at the bottom, this little picture, is the Ponle Acento logo. And for those of you who don't know, and I shouldn't have assumed this in my title, MLB is Major League Baseball, which is the dominant baseball league in the United States. And it has strong ties with Dominicans, which I will explain in a minute. And so just to provide us a bit of a context about why this is important and what this Ponle Acento campaign that I'll explain in a minute has to do with the topics of the identity and language, I want to just very briefly talk about an example from 2013 where a World Classic baseball game between, ironically, the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico was broadcast in ESPN and ESPN Deportes simultaneously in Spanish, because the MLB network had bought the exclusive rights to broadcast it in English in the United States. And so ESPN thought that the viewing audience, particularly because it was the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, would certainly embrace Spanish as a language on their flagship, typically English network, ESPN. There was actually a huge backlash among some social media commentators, and I would venture to guess the vast majority of those were white Americans. And so one of the things that they said was, one of the comments among many hostile remarks to this was that ESPN has been taken over by wetbacks. And that's a very fraught and a very insulting term, usually used actually to describe people who come to the US from Mexico, but has been sort of broadened to use as an insult against Latinx folks in general. And so this is just an example of how language is so tied to race and is such a visceral identity marker, but also a visceral level of hostility can emerge around that in sort of the daily lives of folks who consume media and who consume baseball. And so my main question here is, how does MLB navigate sort of this US monolingual ideology? The US is as English only as it could get without legislating English as the official language of the country, which it has not done, but it's almost unnecessary because the hostility to other languages in the US, particularly Spanish, is such that it is marginalized. And so on the one hand, there's that ideology, and MLB is aware of that. But on the other hand, MLB has a really large player pool that speaks Spanish, and I'll show you some data on that in a few minutes. And so basically, they're trying to please two different audiences. And so how are they doing this? But then also, how does this intersect with inequality and race in the United States? So what I want to basically talk about briefly is just a bit of the relationship between the Spanish language in the US and then also in MLB. I have a few player experiences that I would like to share with you, as well as finally the two things that happened. 2016 was a big year in the US for many reasons, but for our purposes today, MLB started a translator rule, which I'll explain a bit, and then this ad campaign, Ponle Acento, where we see the image in my first slide. So just a very brief historical contextualization. The reason all of this is important as well is because MLB prides itself on being the great desegregator and the great sort of racial equalizer in US society through the desegregation of Major League Baseball in 1947. And scholars like Adrian Burgos Jr. have written very powerfully about this and how actually false it is. So when Jackie Robinson was signed as the first Black American player in 1947, MLB since then has sort of part of the baseball America and apple pie nationalism images, but what baseball always tries to do is to say, and we helped US society to grapple with racism through desegregation when most other institutions were not yet desegregated. Well, that's true in fact to some degree. In practice, no. There's a much longer, more fraught story there. So, but the key thing I want us to understand in this slide, and that applies to what I'm going to say for the rest of my presentation, is this idea of Spanish as a racialized marker that media studies scholar Isabel Molina Guzman has developed. And basically what that means is that the Spanish language and any accents associated with it, either in Spanish or in English, are used in the US to mark someone as non-white and to limit exclusion to access and to resources, and to limit privilege, and also to exclude access to whiteness, which is tied to social privilege in the United States. And just a couple of recent examples to contextualize this. The New Yorkers in the room will remember the very famous case of attorney Aaron Schlossberg in 2016, where he basically accosted a group of people speaking Spanish in a store and threatened to call ICE, which is the Immigration Customs Enforcement, which is now what we call our immigration deportation mechanism in the United States. So then in 2018, even a more blatant example of how Spanish is racialized in these ways, ICE detained two women in Montana at a gas station under suspicion of them being undocumented immigrants because they spoke Spanish. And actually just a couple of weeks ago, the ACLU settled a case. They sued the Border Patrol and actually won. And those women have received a monetary settlement as a result. But this is to say that if you speak Spanish, you are considered suspect, you are considered not fully American in some way, and also excluded in that you don't belong here. And so when we kind of think about that in terms of MLB, what does that look like? And this is where I talk very specifically about the case of Jackie Robinson and the fact that, he was the first Black player in MLB, became very invested in using this as an ad campaign strategy. But also it began to develop a lot of recruitment infrastructure in the Caribbean. If you see on the second slide, or on the second point, my bad. And the two things that are important to look at here are the post-1955 Cuba situation, because that truncated the ability to get players from Cuba into the United States. So other mechanisms have been put in place that are actually really scary in terms of like they're unsafe, which I'm happy to talk about if anyone has any questions. But also 1989, when Puerto Ricans became subject to the U.S. baseball amateur draft because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. And what that meant was Major League Baseball didn't scout there as much as it does in the Dominican Republic and also in Venezuela, because the player pool is not as cheap. Most scholars refer to the Dominican recruitment strategy by MLB as the quote unquote boatload mentality, that MLB just recruits as many young male talented players as they can, knowing that very few of them will make it through, but this is a very cheap and a very consistent and large labor force. And to a lesser extent, that has grown in Venezuela. The academias, which is what they're called in the Dominican Republic, every team has a training facility, which is called an academia in the Dominican Republic, where they prepare players, and teams have them in Venezuela. Although as of when I was doing my research in 2016, due to the economic crisis and political situation in Venezuela, many teams had actually suspended their academias. So before we move on, I just want to briefly touch on the idea of the demographics of MLB. So of 226 players on opening day rosters in 2019, and I didn't look at 2020 because the season was cut short by COVID, and so that might have not been very accurate. By far the most are from the Dominican Republic. The top 5 countries that send players to the US that were not born here are Spanish speaking. And as you can see, the Dominican Republic far outpaces any other country as having 90. The next closest is Venezuela with 53. And so we really see why this really becomes clear then why the Dominican Republic in particular and Spanish is important to MLB because of where they're getting their players. And quite frankly, minor league levels, the numbers of players who speak Spanish and come from the Dominican Republic in particular, but also other Spanish-speaking countries is even higher. By the time they get to the major leagues, the numbers get a little bit lower, but over a fourth of major league players now that you see on your screen, if you watch baseball, are Latinx and not born in the United States in most cases. So what does that look like in terms of players in Spanish? And so a lot of things that you might expect happen. There's a lot of use of ad hoc translating services for people who happen to be bilingual. Most teams would go out of their way to hire coaching staff that were bilingual, and also older players kind of saw it as their role to assist younger, newer players who didn't necessarily speak English very well. What I thought is fascinating, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in a few minutes, where I have player networks. Some players have talked about, particularly Dominican players have said that they sought friendships with Puerto Rican friends on their teams because they assumed that Puerto Ricans would be more likely to be bilingual and that they could assist them with particularly off the field tasks like renting apartments, getting food, just daily tasks. And then the other sort of the difference that we see with Spanish speaking players, and Ossie Guillén, who is a retired Venezuelan manager, has spoken very strongly against this. There's a lot of support for players who come from Japan. They often come with escort interpreters. There is no such, there's not as great of a level of support by any means for players who come from Latin America. And then finally, this 1977 player and owner agreement where players could ask for ESL classes, English as a second language classes, if they wanted to. That's on the books, but very few players do that. That's not something that really has taken off. And obviously it's been there a long time because 1977 is a long time ago. And so what kind of we see then happening on the ground today is a bit of a resistance to players' efforts to handle this themselves. So for example, Orlando Hernandez, who used to be on the New York Yankees, said I really need a translator, I'll pay for it myself. I don't expect MLB to do this. And they said to him, well, you've been in the country 5 years, you should speak enough English, you don't need a translator, Spanish is just, you're using Spanish as a crutch. And then even more recently in 2018, White Sox Vice President Ken Williams encouraged John Moncada, who is a Cuban, who was recently arrived Cuban player, to not use the official translators that are now being provided by MLB because he felt that would distance him from the fans. So again, like just to take a moment with player experiences, we see a lot here, and I don't want to go into this too very much in terms of time, but sometimes this can have legal ramifications. Like Sammy Sosa had asked for a translator when he was testifying about steroid use in MLB before Congress, and then the case a few down of Michael Pineda, who talked to the media about being ejected after illegal use of pine tar in a game. For both of these men, having a high proficiency in the language that they're talking in is really important because there's implications. In the case of Pineda, there's, this has to do with suspension and violation of MLB rules. And in the case of Sosa, this could have legal ramifications in terms of like he could be prosecuted for steroid use. And I also want to emphasize that speaking at a congressional hearing or speaking in front of the media, these are incredibly demanding linguistic tasks in a second language. So unless you are a really bilingual person, this is something that's going to be very difficult for you and potentially have legal ramifications. And so then Aramis Ramirez, who's a retired third baseman from the Dominican Republic, is the one who said, my strategy is I befriend the Puerto Rican players because I think that they're going to be bilingual and so they can help me. And then finally, I just want to take a moment to talk about Dane Betances, who you may all know because he's pitched for both New York teams. He was born in Washington Heights, but has lived between Washington Heights and the Dominican Republic. And so he's bilingual, and he was asked by Marly Rivera, who's an ESPN reporter, like, how is Spanish for you? What happens with other players? Do they make fun of your Spanish? And he said, oh my God, all the time. They criticize the way I pronounce certain words, but I think I do all right. And then when they want to order a pizza or if they need help, then they certainly do come to me as a translator to help them with their English. So we sort of see there's a bit of a range of experiences. And also I would note that in Sosa and Ramirez's era, there was very little language support for trying to learn English in the Dominican Republic before coming to the US. And so just very briefly, this is the translation rule. In 2016, Carlos Beltran, who's Puerto Rican, actually pushed, he's a Puerto Rican retired player, pushed, and I believe is now managing the Mets. He pushed for this. He said, we need to have like a structure of, trained interpreters. And so the first 2 points are obviously what you would expect, that people, should actually be qualified to do it and they should be assessed, which is absolutely the case. But the third point is interesting because the payment for this is coming from punitive funds, because it's coming from fines that teams are assessed for exceeding bonus pools for recruitment of international talent. So I think it's really important to think about the fact that we're basically using money that MLB is punishing people with to then hire these interpreters. And I think that it speaks for itself in terms of how that is problematic and means that MLB isn't really invested in this. And then finally, the Kansas City Royals and the Arizona Diamondbacks were allowed to opt out of this clause, and they're just going to continue to use coaching personnel to translate for their teams because they thought that it would be an issue for team chemistry and that players might not trust outside translators. And so that's, again, shows a bit of a lukewarm commitment to this. And then finally, this is the Ponle Acento campaign. And what I will do is, in the interest of time, I'll drop the link to the YouTube video. It's about a 2-minute video if you want to see this, because this commercial has been posted to YouTube. For Hispanic Heritage Month in 2016, MLB came up with this campaign called Ponle Acento. They worked with LatinWorks, which is a ad agency out of Houston. They do a lot of they do things like McDonald's. They do like a lot of the major Latinx advertising in Spanish. And so, and also for a US audience in English and in Spanish and bilingually. And so this firm got the contract, and so they came up with the icon that you see at the bottom. That's the Major League batter symbol, which has been iconic for years, but they added the acentito at the top, the tilde above the bat. And what you see in the ad, it's quite interesting, is that first of all, the voiceover is in English, but with the Spanish, you can tell that the person's first language is Spanish, and they're in the way that they pronounce things. So immediately there's this like sort of immigrant, like someone who was not born here, is saying this. So that's the voice that we hear. And all the representations are of hardworking immigrants, and this tragedy that Latinx folks lose their identities in the United States as a result of the pressure to, according to this, remove their accents from their names. This has then thus removed something from their identities. And you actually see people, workers at sewing machines sewing accent marks onto people's uniforms, like Gomez or Ramirez or Gonzalez. And so this idea of we need to return and reclaim this type of positive identity through a very iconic image of the Spanish language, an accent mark, but also as tied to MLB, and that MLB needs to be sort of the voice of this reclaiming of Spanish and of identity. And I will stop there and thank you so much.
Gracias, Jennifer. Fantástico. Y por favor, incluye el link, el enlace.
Sí, ahora mismo en el chat.
Por favor. I will also limit myself in terms of the comments so that I can open up the floor for questions and comments from the audience. I will time myself. I am going to be moderating my own comments right now, and I'm going to do 3 minutes. Briefly, I want to comment on Fiordalisa's contribution to this conversation and your paper. And one of the things that upsets me, because it really upsets me, is also, Fiordalisa, cómo los medios de comunicación contribuyen, en mi opinión, esta es mi opinión, contribuyen a borrar la cultura lingüística de algunas nacionalidades. Por ejemplo, podemos ver que en la mayoría de los programas de televisión, los presentadores tienen que seguir una ética lingüística. Muchos de ellos son enviados a otros países para mejorar, y lo pongo entre comillas, mejorar su dicción. Algo que yo lo veo como una opresión y una supresión de la cultura de esa persona. Porque ¿por qué lo hacen para ciertas personas y ciertas personas, vamos a hablar claro, los dominicanos, y no para hispanohablantes presentadores en medios de comunicación que son de otros países? Entonces, ¿cuándo vamos a tener un programa de televisión que sea un poco más unísono e inclusivo, que tenga un presentador o presentadora dominicana que hable como le dé la gana y que siga la cultura popular, de la misma forma que tenga un presentador, presentadora mexicano, mexicana o chileno, por ejemplo? Entonces, en mi opinión, pienso que además de cómo nos vemos nosotros mismos en nuestra cultura, y el comentario que yo incluí, que a mí muchas veces me lo han dicho, me dicen, pero una muchacha tan preparada como tú, ¿por qué tú hablas así? Y es una autocrítica que nos hacemos nosotros mismos, los dominicanos, y que también nos hacen otras personas dominicanas. Livia, me encanta lo que compartiste sobre las traducciones, y Geraldo hizo la pregunta, una de las preguntas que yo tenía, que era, do the translations include footnotes of some of the words? And he used capicú, por ejemplo, or is there a glossary at the end of the translations to explain to the readers, you know, what is the exact meaning of the words or the phrases included in the translation, right? Because translations are used as a tool of cultural expansion, but one of the questions that I'm thinking is, do we lose some of the culture in that process of expansion within the translation process, right? And then finally, for Jennifer, I love the topic. I talk about this in my classes when I teach sports in the Dominican Republic. And I think about, right now, I'm thinking of Vitilla, for example, and how Vitilla has been accepted. And I have like just a few seconds left. How Vitilla has been accepted, and how we sometimes have Vitilla tournaments, even sponsored by major businesses and brands like Red Bull, I think, has sponsored in the past. But the question is, or the thought, is it acceptance, or is it acceptance of culture, or is it really marketing for the corporation in order to maintain the audience so that they can continue to increase the asset that specifically Dominican players traen a la corporación de las grandes ligas, and not so much as a contribution or acceptance of our culture, right? As I mentioned in the comments, Spanish as a crutch, but again, we are not a crutch. We are a dollar symbol for the corporation, yet they want to impose those limitations. And those are my comments. Así es que gracias. Me pasé creo que por 20 segundos. Abro la sala a discusión. Tenemos algunos minutos. ¿Preguntas en el chat? Voy a leer. Brian dice, do you think there is a way to some people that some people might play up the stereotype or their accents to appeal to a non-Dominican audience, and instead of it coming out as authentic, it comes out like the mommy trope? Fiordalisa, esa pregunta es para ti. Yo no, Brian. Yo hablo como me da la gana.
Well, I believe everybody. I don't know if you should speak Spanish or English, but I can do it both. But I believe that everybody have their own accent. Like, let's see. I'm gonna talk about English speaker, right? So if you go for England, when you listen to the England when they speak English, it's not gonna sound the same. Or people from Jamaica, they speak English different. So what you're telling me is that because they speak different English, that doesn't mean that we're gonna exclude them because of that. So those are the things that we have to think about it. There is one language, like the English language, but everybody have different dialect. And that's something that a lot of people doesn't have it clear of what it is when it's accent and when it's different differentiation of the language. So I don't know, it's like a little confusion when it's coming from accent or dialect. So people get misinterpret what is languages, dialect, and accent. Those are three different topics that is totally different.
Muy buen punto.
Bien, también voy a intentar ser lo más objetiva posible para contestar. No hay ningún tipo de glosario, ni notas, ni nada en esa traducción. Eso también me sorprendió porque es un libro para adolescentes, entonces creo que tendría alguna explicación más pedagógica. Pero por otro lado también me parece importante marcar que el tránsito lingüístico es legítimo, ¿no? Es también, no es necesariamente algo que se tenga que traducir. Y de palabras como capicú, que yo descubrí, por ejemplo, con este libro, que esa palabra también existe en portugués y que significa lo mismo. Pero aún sin una traducción exacta, creo que cuando se narra la escena, para los que conocen ese tipo de situación, uno piensa, ¿no? ¿Qué se puede estar gritando en un momento como eso, mientras se juega dominó? Entonces creo que sí se pierde algo, pero algo también se gana cuando no se ponen las notas, porque eso también obliga al lector que haga su propio trabajo de investigación, lo que pueda llegar a ser para la expansión cultural algo bastante positivo.
Tenemos unos cuantos minutos más para comentarios o preguntas. Jennifer, ¿quisieras hacer algún otro comentario agregado a tu presentación? ¿Ha entrado otro mensaje?
No,
interesante.
Si alguien tiene pregunta, eso está bien porque no.
Y yo tengo una pregunta para Jennifer. Yo soy intérprete certificada por los tribunales federales de Estados Unidos, así que escucharte me hizo preguntar si hay ciertos exámenes o si hay alguna manera para determinar la capacidad de los intérpretes.
Sí, bien, claro. Y según lo que he leído, y parte de eso creo que tiene que ver con las cosas que no quieren decir los de MLB, pero supuestamente les van a asesorar a los candidatos. Van a hacer, le dicen en interpreting post-game exercise. Supongo que hacen como unas enseñas con gente de los medios de comunicación y los jugadores, los peloteros, para ver si la persona realmente puede traducir lo que se está diciendo o no. Pero la verdad es que no han establecido oficialmente, públicamente, cuáles son esas evaluaciones o cómo van a asesorar eso. Pero claro, es bien importante, sobre todo cuando pensamos en el hecho de que los equipos ni van a participar de eso, van a seguir usando los coaches o los otros jugadores para no romper la dinámica del equipo. Entonces también creo que hay una cuestión grande de consistencia y de cómo y de justicia lingüística para los peloteros de los Diamondbacks y de los Royals, ¿no? Así que esta es una pregunta excelente.
Y lo veo muy interesante porque sería igual, o sea, un intérprete como yo que interpreto en los tribunales yo sería un fracaso total interpretando para los peloteros. Así que también entra esa cuestión de que si
Claro.
no saben el material.
Claro, claro, definitivamente.
Julie, no tanto. Si tú hablas con Fiordalisa, tiene trabajo.
Bueno, me encantaría.
Ella te puede orientar. We have one more minute.
está.
Tenemos un minuto más para preguntas o comentarios. Geraldo había hecho un comentario de un colega colombiano sobre los dominicanos hablando como los barranquilleros. A mí a veces me pasa cuando voy a Cuba que me dicen que hablo como las personas de Oriente. Y esto se relaciona, y me corrige si estoy equivocada, Fiordalisa, que tú como experta en el tema de la lingüística y el habla dominicana, que en República Dominicana, como tú lo mencionaste, hay diferentes tipos de hablar por zona. Y el hecho de que la gente considera a España como el lugar, el español, el castellano de España, como el correcto y el mejor, cuando ellos entre sí también se discriminan en cuanto a su forma de hablar, porque los sevillanos son vistos como los que hablan mal, al contrario de los de Madrid que utilizan el ceseo, como tú bien lo mencionaste en tu ponencia. Entonces, la gente históricamente no hace esa conexión, que cada país habla de acuerdo al grupo, a la población de gente que recibió, a su demografía histórica, como los puertorriqueños, que el arrastre de la R cuando dicen carro o escajo se debe a la relación y la historia francesa que existe en Puerto Rico. Y lo mismo existe entre nosotros. Así es que, Geraldo, entiendo el comentario que te hicieron, porque me pasa muchas veces a mí, a cada rato me hacen esa comparación.
Sí,
Y
sí.
algo, ay, perdón, sí.
Bueno, una de las cosas es como ya hemos inmigrado bastante dominicanos, pues entonces ya nuestra forma, nuestro léxico ya lo entienden varias personas. Ya yo me doy cuenta que especialmente en Nueva York, tú sabes, se entienden más. Yo vivo aquí en Connecticut y en Connecticut siempre hay un problema especialmente con los sudamericanos, que siempre hacen comentarios, ¿por qué ustedes hablan así? Entonces yo le digo, ¿y por qué usted habla así? ¿No? Porque yo le digo, bueno, la mayoría de mis amigos son colombianos. Yo le digo, ¿qué hubo, hermano? Ave María, pues. Digo, yo puedo coger y cambiar el léxico, pero esa no es mi forma, que yo me siento, la que puedo hablar, y esta es mi cultura. Entonces, siempre hay ese choque entre nosotros mismos, los latinos, ¿no? Y es una diferencia que debemos de hacer. Entonces, y lo que yo le digo, bueno, muchas personas dicen, que tú pronuncias con la S, no pronuncias con la... Date cuenta, los caribeños siempre tendemos a no pronunciar con la S, ¿no? Casi la mayoría de todos. Incluso los cubanos, incluso a mí me gusta mucho el acento cubano. ¿Qué hubo, chico? Oye, Ave María, pues, chico. Pues ese dialecto, esa forma, debemos de ver cómo ellos expresan en poca palabra o en una palabra un pensamiento. Y eso, ahí es donde yo me enfoco, ¿no? Como nosotros los dominicanos, ¿y qué es lo que es, no? Con eso un dominicano entiende algo más de allá, ¿no? Con esa expresión que otra persona tú tienes que estarle traduciendo. ¿Qué es lo que tú me quieres decir con eso, no? Y tú tienes que durar media hora explicándole.
Gracias, Gerardo.
Bueno,
Lamentablemente tenemos que concluir el panel. Gracias a todos los que se quedaron con nosotros, a las personas que estuvieron presentes desde el principio. And of course, thank you to the team who put this together, for all the hard work. The conference has been great. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel. I learned so much and I enjoyed reading and learning from your contributions, from the comments. And one last request, if anyone in here wants to get in contact with the panel presenters, if you want to share in the chat right now your emails, maybe that's an idea to continue the conversation. In the meantime, while you do that, again, I just want to say thank you, and I'll include mine here on the chat as well. I'd like to invite you to please continue with the rest of the program. The Dominican Studies Association also has an auction going on, an art sale that supports the Dominican Studies Association, and I invite you to please take a look at that to support. There's my email. I'm gonna share it with everyone because it's coming to me. Let's see. Perfect. Do we have all of them? Gracias a todos. Y
Gracias.
continúen disfrutando de la conferencia.